What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Wednesday. It's time to go over my favorite trade targets for week 5. I think an important decision a lot of people are faced with right now is what to do with Davante Adams. So I just figured we'd start off with a discussion around him. So Adams requested a trade, likely to be moved pretty soon, and it seems like it's going to cost like roughly a second-round pick, maybe a third-round pick with something else on top of that. Number of teams have already reached out to the Raiders. I'm guessing the Raiders are going to talk with Adams, make sure to get a deal done with the team he actually wants to play for. Because of this news, there's a lot of interest involving trades around Adams, both from people who want to gamble on what the possible landing spot could be, because some of them would be a greatly improved situation, or from people who want to sell high, maybe get some value for Adams in the off chance that it's not a great landing spot for him, or to get some immediate value. So the question is, what should we do? The teams I have seen thrown around as possible landing spots are Chiefs, Bills, Steelers, Jets, Commanders, Cowboys, Lions, Chargers, Ravens, Patriots, and Browns. So a lot of teams. I think some make a little bit more sense than others. But if you kind of look at that general list, you're seeing a roughly even split in what we could consider upgrades for him in fantasy and what we'd consider downgrades. So it's kind of tough to know exactly how valuable Adams is going to end up being until we see the actual team he gets traded for. And also he would be, a wide receiver changing teams mid-season, even for a superstar like Adams. Even if it were a superstar going to a team with a superstar quarterback, it's still a difficult thing to do. Not as difficult as it can be for other positions, but he's still got to learn the playbook. He's still got to develop with the quarterback. So there can still be some overlap of time here where it's like, maybe he's not traded this week. Maybe he gets traded next week. And then maybe it takes him a week to kind of ramp up, and then a couple more weeks to really get on the same page with the quarterback. So there can be a little bit of gap there where he's not as valuable as he will be at the end of the season. Again, I think a deal is going to get done relatively quickly. We've seen reports that, the Raiders aren't in a rush, because why would they be, right? They want to make sure they maximize exactly what they're getting. But Adams does want out. He wants to be on a new team quickly. And at the end of the day, teams want to get him on the roster so they can get things going, help themselves make the playoffs, help themselves really develop as a team. So I think it's going to be relatively soon. In my opinion, it depends completely on your team. If you are struggling right now, and there are people in your league that are willing to buy, which is the case for a lot of people. He's had an okay season, but he's definitely not gone off or anything. So, if you're sitting there 0-4, 1-3, and you're just getting constantly, your league mates are sending you offers for Adams because they think he could land on Buffalo, they think he could land on Kansas City, and they're willing to give you, a top 15 wide receiver. Even like I've seen some people offer, around that wide receiver, like 7 to 10 range. If that's the case, I'd be willing to get a deal done. There's still a chance that, again, he doesn't play until he's traded, that he needs that semi-ramp up. And so since we don't know and there's so much unknowns, and they'd be giving you a player who has immediate, really strong value, again, if you're struggling 0-4, 1-3, 2-2, but you don't feel like you maybe even deserve those 2 wins, it's probably worth letting him go, getting good value for him. On the flip side, you are 4-0. 3-1. You are 2-2, but you realize you've just been a little bit unlucky. You've got a lot of points for. You feel like you have a very strong team. At a minimum, you should be sending out an offer. I understand that it could be a situation downgrade, and it could be a situation downgrade on top of, again, not playing right away. So only do it if you're like really comfortable with taking on that risk and you think you still have a strong team, even if it is a negative outcome. But especially if you have strong depth, I just feel like the ceiling outcome here is at least worth taking a shot on, because I feel like, a really good landing spot here could net you, a top 7 wide receiver over the second half of the season. And that is really difficult to ever trade for. Ideally, you're probably not spending more than like a top 12 to 15 wide receiver in my rest of season rankings. That's the general range of Jaden Reed, Mike Evans, Garrett Wilson. So those types of players, I probably wouldn't push past that, getting even better players than those. Ideally, you're doing 2-for-1s whenever you do these trades. And so if the team is struggling at another position, maybe you package, maybe they're struggling at running back, right? You package someone like J.K. Dobbins, Rashad White, Devin Singletary, something like that. Give them a little bit of depth at running back that maybe they don't have. Plus, you add in someone like Jameson Williams, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers, a wide receiver that can replace Davante Adams, but who's not worth what Davante Adams will end up being worth after the trade. Something like that is more ideal than, because really, if you're just sending a straight up wide receiver trade, you're just gambling at that point. Like, you're just being like, I want to gamble. I want to hope that he ends up on a good team and I get an upgrade, because then it just comes down to that in terms of like 2-for-1 trades. You're at minimum, even if it's, a downgrade situation, you're at minimum at least trying to upgrade that wide receiver spot, and you're giving up other value to do that. So I would try and do 2-for-1 trade. All right, that's it for Adams. Who are some other trade targets this week? This one I'll try and keep a little bit briefer because he's been on the list every single week, but Chris Olave is still at the top of my list. He's now had 2 strong games in a row, so maybe you can't like buy low like you could earlier in the season, but he hasn't dropped a nuke yet. A nuke is coming. He is top 5 in separation score. He's top 5 in win rate. Again, he's been close to a big game, honestly, in 3 of 4 weeks, but he just hasn't quite hit that ceiling yet. I also know it's way too early to actually talk about the fantasy playoffs, but he gets 3 great matchups in the fantasy playoffs, and his last 5 games are all really strong. Versus the Rams, that's like the second best matchup you can get as a wide receiver. Versus the Rams, then he gets at the Giants, versus the Commanders, the number 1 matchup you can have, then at the Packers, and then versus the Raiders. Those are 5+ matchups for wide receivers, with 2 of those 5 being top 2 matchups. Again, Chris Olave, number 1 buy low in all fantasy still. Another buy low is Joe Mixon, gained over 175 yards and a touchdown on 33 touches in week 1. Then he gets hurt in week 2, hasn't played since. Seemed like he was trying to play last week. They said, I think the final report was like it's an uphill battle for him to play, but like the fact that it was like possible last week, I would assume he's back either this week or next week. The Texans offense is obviously elite, and while Cam Akers has looked pretty solid, done well in his absence, we know it's very obvious that Mixon is the superior talent. He is the one that they want to be featuring on this offense, and they did use him as a very featured running back in week 1. Only 7 running backs have a higher average percentage of their team's expected fantasy points, and that's counting week 2. Remember, he left like halfway through week 2, so assuming that, there's still only 7 running backs who are basically more featured than Joe Mixon. And among those 7, you've got Jonathan Taylor, who's injured. You've got Pacheco, who's injured. You've got Mason, who's going to have McCaffrey back at some point. Like, if you just look at pure opportunity, we should expect Mixon to be a top 5 running back this season when healthy. And he's got the upside to be a top 3 running back. So again, if the Mixon team is struggling because they haven't had him for the past couple of weeks, if they are getting desperate at all, see if there is an opportunity to buy right now, because when healthy, Joe Mixon is going to be a league winner this season. At quarterback, I think you're looking at Jalen Hurts. Quarterback 9 right now, only has 1 game over 16.4 fantasy points. I feel like most people understand, right? A.J. Brown hasn't been playing. Devonta Smith missed last week. Like, of course, you're going to see a dip in production when your passing offense is hyper-focused on 2 players and both those players are injured. But I'm confident that most teams that drafted Jalen Hurts this season are frustrated. Then you add on top of it, they're going on bye this week. So they've had this not like really 1 okay game from Hurts and then 3 mediocre games to poor games. They're frustrated with that. They can't play him this week. And so, maybe you hit on a free agent like Sam Darnold or like Baker Mayfield. And you can kind of dangle one of them in front of them. Of course, you'll have to add a skill player as well at whatever position they're weakest at. But see if you can get some sort of deal like that done. It'd also be nice to acquire Hurts right now, because if you can survive this week, maybe you have an option on free agency you can stream after the trade, because especially if you do like, a quarterback plus a skill player to draft or to acquire Hurts, you will have an open spot on your bench. So you will be able to add a quarterback in that deal. If you're able to survive this week by streaming a quarterback, you're going to have your quarterback already on bye. Plus, when he comes back, you're going to have AJ Brown. You're going to have Devonta Smith. Both are going to return in the week after the bye. So we're going to get Hurts back to good value, and we're not going to have to replace him for the rest of the season. He doesn't have the same ceiling as he had before Barkley, because they are going to have more running back rushing touchdowns this season, but he has still, even accounting for that, he's still hit on like the lower end of his range of outcomes so far. Still a quarterback 3 in my rest of season rankings, even again accounting for the fact that they're going to have more running back rushing touchdowns this season. Going back to wide receiver, I'd be trying to buy low on Brian Thomas Jr. right now. He's hit on a few big plays, but kind of like Olave, it's like playing super well, has had good games, but just hasn't hit that ceiling yet, just hasn't broken out yet. I can promise you it's coming, though. They really look for this kid in the red zone. He's going to have a ton of touchdowns this season. And honestly, he's been so much better at separating than I thought he'd be to start his career, because that was our main issue with Brian Thomas Jr. It wasn't that he couldn't separate, right? If you watch this kid at all in college, we knew he was going to be an elite deep threat, right? We knew he was going to separate deep downfield. Any model he made projected him as an elite prospect. Our question was more other than deep. If we look intermediate, we look short, we look at everything else that you have to do besides just running a deep route. It's, can he be consistent enough in that area to be more than just the deep threat, more than just someone who occasionally hits for big games, someone that can actually be relied on in year one as their starting X wide receiver when both downfield and in other areas of the field, so he can be more relied on in an expanded role. Well, last week he had the third best average separation score of any wide receiver. He's already the wide receiver 15 in half PPR scoring, again, having not had his breakout game yet. We also always want to target wide receivers on teams with poor defenses, because like if the defense is bad, the offense is going to find themselves trailing far more often, which of course we want, because it leads to not only more aggressive play calling, more aggressive downfield targeting, but also just elevated passing play rates in general. Only the Commanders and the Rams have a worse defense in terms of EPA per play allowed. Only the Colts and the Rams have given up more yards per game. Only the Falcons and the Cardinals have generated less quarterback pressure. The Jaguars' defense is terrible. All season, they're going to find themselves in holes. They're going to find themselves down. They're going to find themselves needing to be aggressive deep downfield. And to cap things off, all the data in the world suggests that rookie wide receivers break out in the second half of the rookie season. You can still break out earlier. It's not saying that, week 8, week 9 comes along, now the breakout's going to begin. But when you're searching for a wide receiver breakout, you always look to rookies in the second half of the rookie season. I really think from week 8 on, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be a high-end wide receiver too, and I would 1,000% be looking to trade for him now before he has his first 120, 130 yard and touchdown game, because I can promise you, if he stays healthy, he's dropping multiple nukes this season. It's just everything you look for. An elite prospect. They need him on the offense, right? He could be their best wide receiver to close the season. I still think Christian Kirk's a great wide receiver, but he could be their number 1 wide receiver to close the season. Deep threat, poor defense, competent quarterback. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence isn't what we thought he could be when he entered the league, but a competent enough quarterback to where it's everything is going to his way, where you're really going to be leaning on him in the second half of the season. And even right now, again, hasn't broken out yet, and he's a wide receiver 15 in half PPR. The ceiling is absolutely there. I really think him and Olave are just two wide receivers you just got to be going after right now. Again, all of the top targets are Adams, depending on your situation, Olave, Brian Thomas Jr., Mixon at running back, Jalen Hurts at quarterback. That's kind of what I'd be focusing on this week, while also keeping in mind that we are always targeting elite tight ends if we can. Obviously, there are fewer than we thought there'd be this season, but the top options in my eyes right now in trade targets are McBride, Ferguson, Kelsey, and Njoku, probably in that order. If you're able to acquire one of those four tight ends, we know when healthy, they're going to have a very, very strong role this season. Kelsey, of course, generating more value now that Rice is done for the year. But those four are ones that I'll definitely be going over. I have a much larger list on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And you can also just use the rest of season rankings, either for waiver moves or for figuring out some trades on your own. So please be sure to leave a like if you watched this far. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new here. I'll be back tomorrow with a game-by-game breakdown talking about all the start-sit decisions this week. But that'll do it for this one, and thank you all for watching.